All of a sudden, I saw the security people running out, and I said, "What's up?" And they said, they've broken through and they're coming. And then my own security man simply grabbed hold of me and ran.
Pandemonium just broke out in the entire building. Many people on the ANC side, from the government side, all huddled into the government offices. We thought the right-wingers would never dare just march into government offices and start accosting people or assaulting them. And in fact, we even feared that we would be shot at.
The AWB overwhelmed the police, who retreated before them.
Signs of glass and everything shattering and everything, and reports coming through that they are looking for us, particularly Rolf and Cyril.
Terrified delegates barricaded themselves in their offices. In the conference chamber, the AWB chanted and daubed slogans demanding a separate white state.
An important turning point in this process was when my security guards kneeled down with their automatic weapons pointed at the corridor, and as the AWB people came round the corridor, shouted to them, "Stop!"
Ministers were compelled to promise Terre Blanche there would be no arrests. He agreed to take his men out.
Now, this had caused not only a collapse of what we had intended, but what was intended to be something for the attention of the world, then was turned against us.
I was able to discuss the events with some of the National Party ministers, and they, in the end, I think, drove them more and more away from having any form of understanding or even sympathy with the right-wingers.
Soon after the invasion, the negotiators agreed that an election should be held the following April. With the ANC growing in confidence and looking certain to win the election, the National Party had retreated bit by bit on nearly all its power-sharing demands. One remained. The National Party insisted that its white minority ministers must have the power to block ANC decisions in cabinet. They called this governing by consensus.
So the key question now was, now what will they do in cabinet? To what extent will they be in a position to influence or even to veto particular decisions?
It was the one issue on which the ANC was not prepared to make a concession on. That is, the cabinet should be able to take decisions by majority rather than by consensus as they had originally wanted it.
When the last day of the conference came, Ramaphosa was convinced the government negotiators, headed by Rolf Meyer, couldn't afford to take the blame for a breakdown.
We therefore realized that this was their weak point and pressed on very hard until we finally got them to agree in the very early hours of the morning to that cabinet should be able to take decisions by majority rather than on a consensus basis.
This meant that if the ANC won the election, it would run the government. The proposal was put to the existing cabinet for endorsement.
It was indicated that no voting, in fact, would take place, which would mean that our representatives in cabinet would be in a position to influence, to persuade, but would have no final say or veto of any kind. And I disagreed with that.
Delport raised the issue with President de Klerk.
It was a very emotional moment for me. I think it was also an emotional moment for State President de Klerk. I voiced the concern that we maybe eventually end up as National Party being co-opted into an ANC government.
I took the decision and gave the lead that what we should go for is what is now in the Constitution, namely that there will be no voting.
De Klerk argued that the deal was in the best interests of South Africa. Some cabinet colleagues were less sure.
Die basiese beginsels van magsdeling, dat minderheidsgroepe werklike inspraak sou hê om besluitneming te beïnvloed. Dit het nie werklik gematerialiseer nie. Die verste wat ons kan gaan, is om te sê dat ons het 'n teenwoordigheid onderhandel in die kabinet en ons kan waarskynlik by force of presence kan ons besluite probeer beïnvloed.
As the conference wound up with the ANC triumphant, Ramaphosa celebrated his 41st birthday.
I was able to see Rolf Meyer for the first time dancing on the floor where we were having this party. He was quite happy, he was quite jovial, and I kept wondering whether I would have been as happy as he was if I was in his position, having finally given in the way that they had.
Key National Party negotiators were satisfied they had struck a workable deal with an adversary they had grown to trust. Now the election could proceed. Terra Blanche threw all his weight into stopping the election. He summoned a rally at the Pretoria Monument to the Afrikaner pioneers. He said if Mandela wanted war, he would get war. Terra Blanche then persuaded the Volksfront to boycott and oppose the election.
Ons het nie nodig om te verduidelik dat ons wit is. God het ons so gemaak en trou as sy kinders staan ons daarby. Ons graaf meneer die voorsitter het nie nodig om grond te vra. Ons het grond. Ons is die beskawers van Suid-Afrika. Ons is nie bereid om in 'n verkiesing in te gaan waar die ANC die boere se koppe tel.
Terra Blanche threatened force to block the election. Right-wingers looked for leadership to Viljoen, the experienced general. He was reluctant, though claiming he could call on 14,000 army reservists.
I also had forces available, I would say, from what would split off from the defence force. Because had I really taken a military action, there was a real danger of polarization within the defence force. It would certainly have been a substantial number of people that would have splitted from the defence force and would have joined me in fighting for the liberation of the Afrikaner people.
The Volksfront looked for allies. Under apartheid, each of South Africa's black groups was assigned to a tribal state, so that all blacks could be treated as foreigners. These tribal states were to be abolished on election day. Of the 10 tribal states around the country's periphery, the most populous was KwaZulu, in the province of Natal. KwaZulu was a one-party state run by the Inkatha Freedom Party, the IFP, of Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi. He was refusing to take part in the election and could pull perhaps 3 million Zulus out with him.
To organize elections with such a large sector of the potential electorate being non-starters seriously assails the credibility of the exercise.
The ANC now had members on a transitional council which monitored the cabinet on matters concerning the election. They also had access to the intelligence services that had once spied on them, so they could see what their adversaries were up to.
Chief Buthelezi was a greater threat to the process in Terra Blanche because Chief Buthelezi did have a base. He had an ethnic base, a base which had as its main content political backwardness among some of his constituents, but he did have a base and he was able to do damage.